answered as we move along. So I'm going to start really quick this evening with some short introductions for our speakers. And in no particular order, just in the order they're laying on my desk here. I'll introduce Tom Brink. Tom is the current CEO for the Red Angus Association of America. He's also the founder and owner of Top Dollar Angus. From 2008 to 2013, Tom was the president and COO of J&F Oklahoma Holdings Incorporated. That's the cattle ownership sister to the company Five Rivers, where he was in charge of feeder cattle procurement and risk management for a growing feeding business, and eventually procured and marketed over 1.6 million head annually. Tom has conducted extensive research on the factors that create value on cattle, both in the feed yard and on the rail. Tom grew up in Kansas, has a cow-calf background, was a graduate of Kansas State University, and holds degrees in animal science and ag economics. Tom founded Top Dollar in 2013, which was one of the first genetic certification providers for commercial feeder cattle, and the only one exclusively on Angus and Angus-based cattle with top 25% growth rates. I want to thank Tom for being with us this evening. Our next speaker is Dr. Scott Brown. Dr. Brown's current role is the Director of Strategic Partnerships for the University of Missouri's College in Agriculture, Food, and Natural Resources. Scott is from Northwest Missouri. Go Bearcats, right, Scott?
That's right.
And holds graduate degrees in agricultural economics from the University of Missouri. Since joining Mizzou in 1989, Scott has worked extensively in determining the quantitative effect dairy and livestock policies, testifying regularly before the U.S. Congress, and currently working with the Missouri legislature on the economic effects of state policy on Missouri agriculture. Scott can be seen and heard weekly on the Brownfield Livestock Market Update with host Megan Grebner. And our third panelist this evening is Mr. Corbitt Wall. Corbitt is the current commercial cattle manager and market analyst for DB Auctions based out of Canyon, Texas. Corbitt held several USDA market reporting positions, and most recently was the former USDA market reporter and leader of the Federal State Market News out of St. Joseph, Missouri. Corbitt is a fourth generation in his family to work into the cattle industry and has a practical and technical sense of the cattle market, and you can listen to him 5 days a week, give market analysis and commentary on his market report, The Feeder Flash. So, gentlemen, I thank you again for all joining us this evening, and I'm letting people in as we speak. So, guys, I sent you a list of some of the questions that I got sent ahead of time, and I think probably the best thing is just to kind of dive right into it. And so, Scott, I'll kind of start with you. And so, anybody that's in the cattle business has seen we've got a backlog in the fats, okay, in your live cattle market, and that has had a trickle-down effect all the way from feeders to calves. It seems like every report that comes out, we see record volume or numbers, although sale barn receipts tend to start declining. So, Scott, when do you see us kind of heading the other direction? When do we get out of this mirage of going to be better prices ahead and actually get to better prices ahead?
Well, that's a good question of which I struggle with the right answer. I do look ahead into 2021, Zach, and to me, if we get a vaccine and start to see some recovery from COVID-19, I think that has a lot of benefit to the cattle industry. We talked about heavier weight cattle that we've dealt with for much of the year. To me, we're going to move out of that. So maybe some weights back to previous year's levels. But also, we've got fewer cows out there. I think that's going to continue to get us tighter numbers. So to me, of all the meat groups, the cattle industry is in the best shape in terms of fewer supplies, maybe as we get further into 2021. And that could be a benefit. You couple that with what could be then stronger restaurant demand as hopefully we come out the other side of COVID-19 and see these restaurants open up. One can be really positive. I guess for me, the negative that I want to make sure that we get out there as well as we look at 2021. So we've had stronger demand for beef than I think many of us would have ever thought was going to be the case given COVID-19. Real GDP decreased about 4% this year when it's all said and done. And many always wondered whether that would cause a slowdown in terms of demand for beef products. I just am looking at some data right now that makes me worried as we go to 2021. So I believe real GDP will grow 3% or so as we look at 2021, but real disposable income, that real disposable income this year was actually up about 6%. And you may say, how do we do that? Government stimulus matters. 34% of real GDP given in stimulus this year, I think, put more money in folks' pockets that at least a portion of that was spent on beef. As you look at 2021, current forecasts would suggest real disposable income will actually decline 3 or 4% in 21. Which of those income measures drive beef demand? And if we get the recovery in real GDP driving beef demand, I can get more optimistic about where we go as we get in latter 2021, Zach.
Okay. Corbitt, I'm going to bounce to you next, and the little part of that where you see declining receipts showing up in sale barns until, of course, maybe this past week, kind of been a big week. But what are you seeing from your chair?
Well, our receipts have been lighter of these calves. Of course, there's always a lot of calves to sell in the fall because everybody wants to have their calves born in the spring, and you continuously hear me repeat that because I don't think it's sticking in. But we need more fall calvers to smooth out our supply. But we've had our big fall run, and this week it caught up where it was backed up some, but especially in the south, been significantly lighter in the southeast, and I think I think there was a lot more cows sold off. Our last inventory report from USDA said we indeed had kind of topped off and we're coming down and starting to decline on numbers in our calf crop. And I worked for USDA long enough, and I've watched those reports long enough to know that they're usually a year and a half behind. And I think that we've got lighter numbers. I think we've got to get through the first and maybe into the second quarter before we start getting to some lighter numbers. I think Dr. Brown is sure right. If we can get through this, how have we made it through this COVID deal with our food service? Nothing. How have we made it through there as well as we have? It's unbelievable, really. But I think if we get these food service going again, I think that will help tremendously. I hate to admit it because I was not a Biden supporter per se, and I actually saw a T-shirt recently that I thought about getting that kind of said summed it up for me. It said, "If you don't like Trump, you're probably not going to like me either," and that was a good T-shirt, I thought. But you have to be, realistic looking at things. I think the Biden administration, if in fact they do get inaugurated, is going to help our cattle market a little bit. China has pretty much depleted all of the places they can go for animal protein, not to have to trade with us because they've had hard feelings and stuff because Trump held their feet to the fire on so many things. And I think we could see significant increases in ag products selling to China, and they're hungry over there. I think it could help on our swine, on our poultry, our pork, and our beef.
Very good. Tom, what do you think? You got an opinion on this deal?
No, I think it is extremely impressive how demand has done this year. As both of our other speakers have said here, it's amazing that we've gotten through this year with the demand we have. And it maybe is some of that is retail. You shift retail versus food service, you get a little higher share of the retail dollar than you do the food service dollar. So maybe that was some of it. But I think still overall, if you look at food demand, it's been very good too. We've gotten our share of that. And so surprisingly strong demand wise. And going into 2021, I guess I'm pretty optimistic. I think we will get through this backlog. We will get weights, like Scott said, back into shape, kind of where they should be, more in that normal zone. And we need some rain. We need some spring moisture in quite a few places, actually. That'll be important to the spring calf market. There's no doubt about that. Not everywhere, but there's quite a few places still. Look at the old U.S. drought map, and you'll see a lot of brown on there. And so that'll be important to us. But really, all things considered, I'm fairly optimistic about 21.
Very good. Well, that's a very important point about the U.S. drought monitor. That thing seems to grow a little every day. So I'll preface this next question a little bit. Obviously, anybody in the cattle business over the last 3 to 4 years just feels like they've gotten gut punched, and everybody's looking for answers, if you will, or solutions. And Corbitt, I listen to your feeder flash quite often. And you've been a big proponent of mandated price discovery. Okay, so mandated trade of cash cattle. Formula sales seem to have been on a pretty steady incline over the last several years. So if we assume that somehow the government can mandate a cash cattle trade, an increase in cash cattle trade over at least the 5 area region. Number one, I guess, do you think that's going to be enough? Do you think that's actually getting to the heart of the problem? And number two, I guess, and I'll just have to say, I completely agree with that preface in its root. But what's going to keep a lot of these formula feedlots from just say negotiating just for the sake of negotiating? It's that whole, well, what do you want to give today? And I'll just take 108. Well, that sounds great to me, sort of a negotiation. Let's turn it in for cash price. I mean, what's actually going to be the teeth in that sort of a scenario, if you will?
Well, the different ways that we've looked at for mandating minimum negotiated cash requirement would be overseen by your mandatory price reporting, which does have auditors from the ARC branch, audit review and compliance, that come in there and make sure that what they put down in negotiated sales was in fact a negotiated sale, and anything that they had that had kickers or anything goes into a formula. So they'll go in and they will audit the books and the government's already told us. I think we're fixing to find out that what everybody assumed, that the investigations that we had aren't going to bring anything. I don't know what any of us thought they were going to do. I don't know if they thought they were going to go in and start pulling packers out by the ear, kicking and screaming to jail, or that's not going to happen. Who do you go to? It's not our packer buyers. I mean, they're just doing what they're told to do, and then you've got a board there. It's a corporate system, and they are going to do. It's kind of like NASCAR. If you're not cheating, you ain't trying hard enough. And if they've got a committee there, a board to satisfy, they're going to do whatever they can do, and unless there's rules in there to limit monopolistic practices, they're going to continue to do it. And we've got to get that pushed through. The government, with that initial response to the investigation and initial report, they said, dummies, here, fix this. And they basically told us, if you read through that, they told us you can use the things that we're doing, the things that we're offering right now to help push this through. We got 2 bills up, the 5014 bill with Senator Grassley. I think the Deb Fisher bill, the Cattle Market Transparency Act, has a better chance. It's got more flexibility in it, which I think is a good thing. The problem is the parameters have not yet been set, so the fight is still ahead of us. But I really believe that if we don't get something like that mandated within the next few years, we're in the hog business.
So, Tom, I'll jump to you next. You've spent a chunk of your career, if you will, that plays that game and corporate feeding. What I'm interested to hear what your stance is on, say, mandated cash negotiated trade.
I guess, Zach, it'd be pretty simple. I think we have to try some things and hopefully some non-governmental actions first and see if they will change the situation, change the dynamic some, because it is definitely problematic. I mean, we've never seen anything really in the history of this business like the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, kind of depending on how you define it, with the extreme margins in one segment and and demand very good really throughout that whole period of time, and the cattle industry not sharing in that kind of proportionally compared to the past. So I think those are facts. I just think those are facts, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I don't know that there has been any illegality in any of this, but I think that the thing that we are seeing is we know this, we have an oligopoly on one side, and we have the feeding industry really isn't a mom and pop business, but it's still very highly fragmented relative to who we're selling our product to. And so you've got a balance of power, even if everybody's doing everything right. And honestly, you've still got a big balance of power there that is different. And I think the thing that to me is gets my attention the last year or two is when we start talking about, and Corbitt mentioned it in the Southeast, and I think Scott nodded his head when they were talking about cow numbers starting to decline. Here we are in really record demand, and we're talking about trying to get leverage back by shrinking our supply. And that is bothersome. I mean, there's no other way to say it, but we should be growing our herds to some, maybe a little bit at least. And yet that's not going to happen. And so I think we have to really ask ourselves as an industry, what can we do? And we are. That's why we're having these serious conversations. We need to try some things. I mean, again, hopefully some non-government, and see what we can accomplish. See if the 25-14, wherever all that lands. I mean, I think we clearly have to try some things to see if we can change the dynamics, because they truly are not in a great place today.
So Scott, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. I know you've made the comment before, be careful what you wish for when you talk about government mandates. And I think a lot of people can probably agree with that assessment. And I've also heard you say, I can see the problem. I'm not sure what the solution is that's actually going to work. So what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so Zach, I think you set it off very well. I do worry that legislated mandates have unintended consequences. So if you march down that road, I believe the industry needs to march carefully down that road. And again, I'm not against the discussion. It's just take a look at the dairy industry, and I think you find dairy producers who are not all that excited with the regulated pricing that they have in place today. And so when I say I can't find a solution, cattle industry is not the only industry that's suffering through very little cash trade. And to me, the question is whether or not we're getting adequate price discovery. And adequate price discovery does not mean higher prices. It really means are we finding the equilibrium where supply and demand meet? And that's a very hard question to answer. I think a lot of times economists are turned to answer that question. And I frankly I don't think we're all that well equipped to know exactly what level of negotiated trade we might need to have adequate price discovery. I think it depends on a lot of other factors as well. But this is a hard issue. Tom made a very good point about it's been the last few years where this seems to have been the bigger issue. It's amazing what an increase in numbers from 2014 through 2019 has done. A lot tighter shackle space in the cattle industry than we've faced in, frankly, decades. And so I think that's been at play to some of what's going on. At the same time, I agree with Tom, we're going to solve this by reducing the cow herd. that doesn't make for a healthy industry long term. My concern or my thought is that you have to find better ways to get coordinated from start to finish. All of that comes with issues as well. We like to be an industry that's fairly independent, and the idea of finding ways to be more coordinated, I think, is a tough road for us. But it's worth discussion, and I actually think with the incoming Biden administration, we could see a lot of focus here. I'm curious to watch that unfold. The last point I'll make to mandatory price reporting. That's only extended through the current CR, continuing resolution. I have not heard a lot in the last few days as to whether or not there's been any movement to try to get mandatory price reporting extended for a longer period of time. The last thing we need is to lose mandatory price reporting. I also worry if we mandate trade. Yes, AMS is there to try to regulate, but tell me the rules, and I, as a trader, I'm going to play right up to the edge of them. And sometimes that may allow me to have cattle that maybe with a wink were somewhat more formula based, get in that negotiated bin. I think some early information from AMS might have suggested they could regulate there, but I think there's a lot more legislation needed if we go the mandated route to make sure AMS has to do everything they need to make sure we're adequately checking where those cattle bin in terms of are they formula or are they negotiated trade.
So Scott, I'll follow up real quickly back with you on a follow-up question, and I'll Corbitt as well. Is our problem really, the pricing mechanisms, or is our problem the transparency within the market? Because I think as we've seen through the corona, through the burning of the plant, formula feedlots were really kind of the losers a lot of the times. So is it a transparency issue? I mean, or is it a price discovery issue? I think it's different, is it not?
So price transparency and price discovery are certainly very different things. As we've talked about, a Grassley 5014, to me, that is all about price discovery. We want enough negotiated trade to feel like we have adequately found the market clearing price that should be in place. To market transparency, it's a good question, Zach. I hear that a lot, and I'm looking here at today's CT 109 going. So I can tell you that steers on a negotiated grid basis, the range was 154 to 184 today. I know the average, and so I go. I don't have a problem with more transparency, but what is it besides the range and the weighted average that folks want to see? Regardless, there's a lot of difference from 154 to 184. I get that. Some folks negotiating better than others, and we might argue about who's getting those better deals, right? But to me, that's the price transparency issue that maybe needs to be addressed. Do we want AMS to report more than the range? Now, I think getting changes in mandatory price reporting that gives you more information comes with a huge struggle, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't be exploring those.
So Tom, I'll move on to you. What are your thoughts? I mean, you played in this game a long time. Price discovery versus price transparency. I think. What are you thinking?
I mean, increasing transparency from where we are today could certainly contribute positively. I think it would be incremental, quite honestly, though. I mean, we really have to think about leverage. And again, back to the dynamics of the market, the structure of the market, it is a market that has leverage leaning more to one side, especially when numbers are larger. The other thing that needs to be mentioned here is, and I think Scott, maybe Corbitt said it, capacity. Okay, we need more packing capacity. That helps drive more competition into the marketplace, almost regardless of where it comes from, as long as those are packers that can compete and run fairly efficient businesses. And that's margins have been so good that is starting to happen. We are seeing some of that, but it's slow because the buildup in that business, I mean, the size and scale is very difficult, and so it's slow. We've also seen a lot of cattle go around the normal channels, and we're all aware of that. We've seen more direct to the consumer in a lot of different ways. These local locker plants, as I think everybody on the call knows, are booked out probably in many cases all the way through 21 already. And so that's a response to what's happening in a couple different ways. But I really think, transparency and the negotiated portion of the market, maybe increasing that some if it's needed, another 5 or 10%. I don't think it's back to 50% necessarily, to the points that Scott made, but it's possibly a little bigger than where it is. But again, we have to think in terms of capacity and leverage and balance and so forth. And those things really won't be changed that much by some of these other points that we're talking about here. And so that makes it more difficult. That's why we all sit here and we say we can see the problem, we can define it, we can identify some things that might help, and that's good. We ought to try those things and see what, within reason, and minimize the government involvement, as we have already talked about. But at the same time, I'm not sure that that's going to fix it. The other thing that needs to be mentioned, though, is all the grid and formula trade has had an extremely positive impact on our industry in terms of paying value for more valuable cattle, paying more for more valuable cattle. That has sent signals, and I think everybody knows this too, but that has sent signals to our industry in the last 20 years, especially I would say the last 10 to 15 years, that prior to that we never had, and we were a pure commodity business. The incentive for really improving genetics and management and so forth were limited. That has been a good part of this high volume of the use of formulas and so forth.
That's a very good point, Tom, and I'll come right back around to that point because we got some very pointed questions to that. I want to move to Corbitt and kind of finish our thought on on kind of our contracted formula sales, because I heard you say more than one time in your feeder flash in the midst of the COVID that these formula feeders were kind of getting left standing. Their cattle couldn't find the hook space, and packers were going back to buying on the live, presumably because there might have been kickbacks towards boxed beef prices, but we don't necessarily know that for a fact. I'd like to hear your thoughts about that, Corbitt.
Yeah, that's true. We found that out, that we don't know what's in these deals. Nobody knows, and it's the last thing that your packers or your corporate feeders that are their partners want us to find out. And that's something that's in Deb Fisher's bill, is she is calling for basically a library of the different formula contracts that are out there. I guarantee you these corporate feeders and your packers will not fight minimum negotiated cash requirement like they would fight what's in those formula deals. I live right there south of Amarillo. I'm neighbors and friends with all these guys that run and manage corporate feeders, and not literally, but I cuss them every day on my feeder flash. If you ever watch it, it's not against them. It's just against the nature of what's happened, and I talk to those guys and friends with them, and they grew up the same way everybody else, working on a ranch or handling cattle or picking up cattle or whatever. They hate to see it too, but that's the business that they're in. and they know that it's ruining the industry, but they've got to have a bottom line on there. And they will tell me, they said, I don't know how these feedlots that sell cash survive, because we could not survive if we sold cash. Said, you say there's no negotiation in those formula deals. Said, yeah, we negotiate once a year. We know exactly what kind of cattle we feed. We know exactly what kind of goals we can hit, on grids, and we work those formulas to our advantage. And he said, you can't believe what all's in there, up to and including Big 12 football scores. And I really believe that could be part of it. But we found out indeed that some profit sharing and or wholesale beef markets, box beef cutouts or what have you, are included in some of those because they can't afford those cattle when they had inflated those box beef cutout values so high during the worst of the COVID. They couldn't afford those cattle anymore. And evidently there's no teeth to those formulated deals because they didn't have to pick the cattle up. Because I know, I call them junkyards, guys that feed plainer type cattle, put together deals, just odd types of cattle that are around the Hereford, Texas area. And they said, we had packers calling us that have never called us. And they were wanting to buy cattle on a live basis. And it just has to be that they were buying those cattle so much cheaper than what those formulated cattle would have cost. And I talked to guys that run major corporate formula yards, and they said they are hanging us out to dry. Our cattle are getting so cattle up, and it's pitiful. But in this day and age, we just feel like everything is corrupt. And it's kind of like what Dr. Brown said. If we do put these rules in place, your packers are going to try to get around them immediately because people don't want to follow rules anymore. And we just get to the point where we feel like everything is so corrupt. Just with Charles Grassley trying to get the 5014 bill through. And I've never been a big of the 5014. It was all 3014, whenever I was pushing it, because I think you have to leave room for those corporate feeders. You have to leave room for the people that are doing some of that value-based marketing. And then you have to have a place for the cash sales in there. But, I think it wouldn't take, I don't even think it would take 30 to make a huge, huge difference. Going back to our prior question, there's major packer facilities, and that's the way these percentages would be done, would be a facility per major packer facility large enough to report to mandatory price reporting. Well, several of those in the Southern Plains don't buy any negotiated cash cattle at all. They don't have a packer buyer. They don't have a procurement office. All they have is schedulers. You major difference to have those have to come in and even buy 15% of their weekly kill? It would be huge. It would be huge. Your feedlot manager could kind of sit back late in the week whenever there hasn't been a lot of trade and just wait for the calls to come in rather than scrambling as early as a Tuesday trying to get in so he can get his show list gone. It would be huge. And I think it would save the industry. I really do. But the crookedness that you see, we had our Senate Ag Committee chairman out of Kansas would not put the 5014 bill up for debate or a vote within the Senate Ag Committee. Why? Because his closest assistant was married to a JBS lobbyist. I mean, it's everything. It's just like this election. It's like everything else. We just get to the point where we feel like everything is crooked. And, as we're even talking about which one of these bills help and how would it help, we all know they're going to do everything they can do to try to get around it. And it's frustrating.
Zach, let me jump in for just a second.
Okay.
There's one other thing, and it's more on the feeding side that I think is affecting the situation some, and it's kind of subtle, and it's been an incremental trend over lots of years, and that's of our days on feed. We have gotten to now, and I'm talking even before the fire in Garden City and before 2020. If you go back to even 2018 and look at our days on feed. Now, what happened was in about 1998 to 2000, a lot of people were experimenting with grids and formulas, and they found out adding days to cattle was the right thing to do in terms of making cattle more valuable for those grids. But if you really look at the trend since then, that's been 20 years. We have put, I think, too many days on our cattle today, and our system has become very forgiving on yield grade 4s. We've had such a quality push that the grids became extremely forgiving on percentage 4s. And that has, I think, and I'm not saying we got lazy. We maybe just kind of got a little complacent and let those days slip up. And you can think about what that does to leverage. We probably, as an industry, both the PCC data and the CattleFax data would say we've added roughly 30 days on feed to the same in-weight animal in the last 15 to 20 years. We probably, from a bargaining position standpoint, would do well to take about 10 days off. And we have the genetics in many cases to do that and still produce the quality. So that's another, maybe a small piece of the puzzle here. But I think it does. I mean, the longer the days, obviously, the less negotiating power you have, the less time you can wait if you need to get some cattle moved. And so I think that's something else that ought to be at least mentioned.
That's a good point, Tom. And so I'll kind of come right back to you because we've been talking a lot about marketing fat cattle, and everybody in Missouri is going, I don't really care about marketing fat cattle, but in reality you do, because it's a waterfall, right? It comes down to you eventually. But so you mentioned the market signals for quality, and there have definitely over the last 20 years been market signals given to increase quality in what you feed in the calf crop. And so, you talk about grid marketing and talk about, say, CAB premiums. And I've personally sold cattle where it's been, 60 cents a hundredweight premium. And I've sold cattle where it's been several dollars a hundredweight premium. And that, tends to fluctuate on a lot of different factors. But when you boil that down, and I'll try to make a point here pretty quick, when you boil that down to the cow-calf world, what that said is go buy black bulls, preferably Angus, but they need to be black. And when you look at the sale barns, and I run the country and the territory across northern Missouri, when you look at the northern Missouri sale barns, if they're not black, they don't sell. And so there's been some definite market signals, if you will, given to the cow-calf producers. When you start doing the math on that, 60 cents a hundredweight adds up to about $5 a head. $5 a hundredweight adds up to an 800-pound carcass. It's not that much money at the end of the day if you want to talk about, say, feed efficiency and what you just talked about, less days on feed. So to me, there's been a little bit of I think the signal's been very clear: go buy black or possibly red, white cattle, or if they've got a white face, do something different with them. But the question gets posed in the cow-calf world: should we do what's profitable for us or what's profitable to the packer? And that was, I don't know. That's the discussion point. Tom, what do you think about what?
Sure. No, there's like you said, Zach, there's been a definite push toward and a message for quality. And it's kind of unfortunate that became so color focused. I think that is starting to change now, but it's still, it's not going away fast at all. And feed efficiency, your math is correct. I mean, there's more economic opportunity with feed efficiency, but it's a hard trait to measure and to improve. We just now, I would say within the last 3 to 5 years, and maybe especially the next 5 years, are going to address that in a bigger way. I mean, before we had all these grow safe systems around, we didn't have too many breeds that had intake EPDs. Now a lot of them do, and you're going to see more emphasis on that. And so we did kind of do the old cattle industry thing and focus on top line value and not always look at the cost side of the ledger. But I think we are starting to address that. I really do look for a ton of emphasis in this industry on feed efficiency, intake, lower intake or average intake for the same amount of performance, or actually above average performance, and still quality as well. And I think we found out that with using EPDs, we can produce cattle that aren't big at birth, but grow fast, right? And grow very, very up to a good size in terms of a carcass that makes sense. Those are antagonistic traits. And the same is true for some other things that we need to work on. And feed efficiency is kind of last to the party, you might say, because it's one of the hardest traits to measure. But we are making good progress on that. And I really look for a lot of good things to happen there the next 5+ years. I mean, from to your other point about, do we lean all one way? Do we not think about the cow and only think about the end product? That's obvious, right? We can't do that as cow-calf producers. We have to maintain balance. And if you use your genetics correctly, I'm one that doesn't criticize those that straight breed, because I know a lot of people that do a good job with that. But I also know a lot of people that do an extremely good job with crossbreeding, and they take advantage of hybrid bigger. So I really just encourage people to think through their breeding programs, to develop a plan that works for them, that looks both at the cow side and the steer side. You want to have steers that the market wants. And I know we're not going to talk about breeds, and it's always more than breeds anyway here tonight, but you really can learn about what the market wants and will pay for, and make sure you've got that in your steers, as well as if you're keeping your replacement heifers, if that's part of your program, then make sure that you're producing a female that's going to work back in your herd as well. And of course, we always talk about, herd size, smaller producers. It's a pretty good argument. Maybe they shouldn't be raising their own replacements. Maybe they're better off to buy them and just terminal those females in their herd and that kind of thing. I mean, I really have a tremendous respect for the Show Me Select program, because they showed all of our industry that what you can do if you really put some good management practices, practical kind of things. Yeah, it takes a little work, but in terms of much more valuable bred female, you guys in Missouri showed all the rest of us all around the country what can be done. And that's something we can all learn from. And I hope that we are. So those are a few. We do have, last point maybe, we do have genetics today in a number of different breeds, and especially if you put breeds together constructively in a crossbreeding system, you can find cattle that do it all. I mean, you can find maternal cattle that still will produce enough weight on the steer calves and enough of the right traits and characteristics, marbling, growth, etc., that you're going to find good demand when you go to sell those calves. And I think that's the important thing to consider, is not to say I have to do all one thing or all the other thing. I can balance those traits. I can accomplish a lot and produce a female that's going to work back in my herd, but also produce some steer calves that are going to have value to a cattle feeder.
So Corbitt, I'll throw the question to you. You have spent a lot of time in northern Missouri, a lot of your time in northwest Missouri. What's your opinion on kind of what we were just talking about market signals to the cow-calf producer trending towards maybe, et cetera, et cetera? And I mean, the one thing that comes to my mind, and I'm a little bit of a conspiracy theorist, is that there's enough of kickbacks on formula feedlots that they've got to have enough CAB or better cattle that we've got to go that direction. I don't ever see the cow-calf producer getting, say, the premiums that probably need to be there for what you're giving up. What's your thoughts?
Well, I'm starting to get a little drag on you. I don't know if the other guys are or not, but I was listening to this, it became very apparent that I was involved in a discussion in the Midwest, because where I live now in the Texas Panhandle, nobody cares about any of that kind of stuff. They just want cattle that they can keep alive. And we've got many feedlots in the Texas Panhandle that only feed Mexican feeder cattle. And the reason they do that is because they don't die. They're agier. That they've been roughed up. It's kind of been a survival of the fittest. When those cattle come across, there's a lot of them that didn't make it, and they come up there. And they're not all that concerned with quality. They know if they roll feed to them long enough that they'll grade. There's been a lot of issues that come up as I was listening to Tom talk. I think the camera grading has changed a lot. 80% choice in the Texas Panhandle. Go drive around those feedlots and think if you're seeing 80% choice cattle. It's unbelievable. Those, since we've taken the graders off the line, it's a lot tougher. One of Roger Parker, I know you know him there in Missouri. He was a grader at one time, and he said, I asked him what he thought about all this grading, and he says, well, I know who's doing all the grading. It's Santa Claus, because it's so easy for cattle to grade choice anymore. But you mentioned, that makes such a big difference on the price of feeder cattle with the color. I was involved with a study they did in Iowa, actually here not that many years ago, and they went to all the auctions in Iowa to see what made the biggest difference, and it wasn't color, it was lot size. And so the little odd deals just don't bring as much. If you get a big long string of smoky Charolais with a black nose, or some red Angus cattle, or something like that, they're going to bring almost as much. But I don't understand, and I never could understand why people fought the black craze. Go for it. The certified Angus beef has done such a wonderful job promoting their product. There's people in New York City that know what Angus means, and they think it tastes better. And God, I would never criticize that, because it's helped our beef industry. It's helped the demand for beef. People thinking that Angus is better. You can slap Angus on a cheeseburger ad, and people will start buying it because they think it's better. And it's a wonderful program, and they've done an excellent job, and it's helped our industry. And there's just so many of our big outfits that have went that way. And once you get a big, I want to make them more like each other, and so that ends up helping the black out. But I know more. So you got people, whenever feeder cattle start to get high, rather own a feeder animal that's efficient at heavier weights, and just keep that animal and keep putting more weight on them, rather than trying to replace them with something and having them, getting them on feed and all that kind of thing. But been a lot of guys hanging 1,700 pounds on these cattle here lately. And we've got to get back off of that too, if we're going to get any leverage. And just like they were saying earlier, we've got to have less tonnage if we're going to get any leverage. But I don't know what the answer is. People do things all around on this different breed types and everything. But these other, the hottest thing, I've been doing a lot of production sales, a lot of replacement type sales. The hottest thing going right now is a red Angus female. And, I think people are learning that you can do the same thing with different colors.
I'm sure Tom appreciates that comment very much.
It's hard to argue with, I'll say that. But I mean, I think what Corbitt said about CAB and the whole quality movement, I mean, is absolutely a fact. It's done a lot of good things for the industry, and hats off to the CAB folks for the work they did. And now you see a lot of lookalike brands out there in the industry that are up to 2/3 choice. There's been more emphasis on prime. I really don't see the emphasis on marbling going away, even though you talk to packers, they will say, in a sense, they will say, yeah, we'd like to see the quality maintained. We would like to see some improvement in the yield grade 4s and the days on feed, and to some degree, maybe the genetics as well. But a lot of it is related to days on feed. I really don't think the last 10 days that we're putting on these cattle are making us any money today. And we have the genetics to take. If you look, it's interesting, because if you look at poultry and swine, as they improve their genetics, their days to finish went down. And I think we need to do the same thing in our industry. And we can do it with the better genetics we have available today. It's harder in our business because, of course, our cow-calf industry is very fragmented and a lot of small operators, but doesn't mean it can definitely have some impact on it.
So Scott, I'll kind of throw it to you a little bit, because I know you've looked at this in a lot of different ways in Missouri, and we've had a lot of in-depth discussions on feeding quality cattle and for that fact, breeding quality cattle. So, everything I've seen and everything you've researched and all the publications, the prime premiums are there. But I'll just reiterate the fact that I continue to have cow-calf producers that sell calves that necessarily those premiums for. So what's your message to the cow-calf producers out there to try to capture that value that we're talking about is in the marketplace?
Yeah, good question, Zach. So I just want to reiterate, when you develop a marketing program that creates new consumer demand like CAB has, it is a win, period. And I think both Tom and Corbitt hit that very well, but we do not want to go away from finding those new opportunities to create new demand for beef. I'm not sure I know what the next one is, but that's the win for the industry. To the question you posed to me, it's interesting if you look at the data that we have available to us, and I got a little Joplin data here to kind of set the stage for the question. And if you go back to the early 2000s, and I was just taking a week in November, it's hard to get all that data together, but just take a week in November, feeder cattle prices in that $500 to $600 range, they were top to bottom $15, $20. All right, you go to the drought of 2012, and that same week, those cattle were $40+ different. Those calves. I go, to me, it tells you a lot about when feed costs are high. Those cattle that do more than grade, that people know about how they perform in the feed yard, become worth a lot, and there is some additional price paid for those feeder cattle. So although we don't explicitly see that all the time, to me, the data is showing a bigger spread top to bottom. So last week, we were about $40 from top to bottom in Missouri combined prices. I sometimes go, the lower quality cattle are the ones that are suffering the most right now. Those cattle that somebody knows something about seem to be holding value a little better. And knowing something about is how they feed, whether they die, how they grade. Some of those reputation cattle that are out there have done much better. I see lots of examples of folks who know very well how their calves feed and work feed yards very hard to maximize the dollars for those calves to go in the feed yard. And so I see that change is happening and has been happening for a period of time. It's not that you're going to get $5 for doing something, but when you look at those overall top to bottom on a day, and there's a lot of things to it, bigger lots, et cetera. I know all of that plays into what we get top to bottom, but I don't want us to lose sight of the fact of what that data is already showing us, that top to bottom, these prices continue to widen as we've gone through time. And I think that is some indication that those calves that are, however you want to define that, are getting some better prices relative to the unknown cattle that are out there. And sometimes those unknown cattle may be very good, but if those feed yards don't know a lot about them, they're going to be a little more risk adverse about what they do there. So I think that's the issue. And so, yes, prime premiums have been good. They're not as good as they once were. You're building, in many ways, that prime market was a market niche that was built. You want to take advantage of those. If that premium's there and it fits in your operation to focus on quality, why would you not do it? That doesn't mean it fits in everybody's operation. I always say, don't go halfway. So if you want to be a low-cost producer, I'm probably okay with that strategy, but you better be a low-cost producer. If you decide, hey, I want to work on quality and I think I can get a premium for my calves, then you better go to the other end of the spectrum. Don't go, oh, I focused on quality last year, but I'm not so worried about that in this bull choice this year. I don't think you can go back and forth. And so I think we need to teach or help our producers think about where do they fit in that spectrum of, am I just worried about low-cost calves, producing those low-cost calves, or do I want to? And I think there's not a single answer to that. That's why we're so fragmented in this industry. So I think those opportunities are available on both ends of that spectrum.
So Scott,
I'd like to add on to what Dr. Brown was talking there. And I see that as I've traveled around in my career, something that Missouri producers probably do too much is they take too good a care of their cattle when they don't have a really goal where they're going. They're cattle feeders. They're not backgrounders. They're feeding cattle almost finished rations, and they're just making big fat feeder weight cattle that people don't have a lot of desire for. You got to leave a little meat on the bone, and you have to save money while you're doing it, because you're not going to get the weight. But with all that supplemental feeding that you don't do, you're gonna save money there. If you're going to give something every bite it wants to eat, the whole time that you have it, and you've got the kind of genetics and things that you have been talking about, number one, you need to have enough of them to make a difference. And that means you need to have a pop load of them. I think a lot of our smaller producers, what they need to do is they need to sell their heifers earlier and then buy back some steers and make a load of cattle. If you just have a piece of a load of cattle, you really can't yell out any of the things that they have, because nobody can find another piece of a load that goes with them. And so, they're just they're hurting themselves on that. And I consistently see guys that do it cheaper. They last longer. They get the high prices on the cattle that don't have to have all those genetics, because they leave a little bit of performance on the bone for your cattle feeder.
There's a couple of things to add to this, maybe, if I could, Zach. Number one, I think every cow-calf producer, large or small, should ask themselves this question. And it's about the feeder calves that they sell. And the question is really pretty simple. Are these calves worthy of some type of a third-party value-added label? Because that's where the industry is headed. If you look at the value-added programs that we're seeing across the industry today, there's more of them all the time. They're documenting different things from health to genetics to some cases nutrition, management. Various programs are out there. Breed composition is there. And so we really, I think, of us should be looking at our commercial, what is in a sense certifiable or verifiable that will add value to my calves, and then look around the industry and see these third-party programs and see where I fit in, because we used to talk a lot about premiums in a theoretical sense. But I think what Scott went through with those price spreads is documentation that top end, they are getting premiums. They are getting an above average price. And so think about that from the standpoint of what are you doing today with the feeder calf portion, if you're keeping heifers, but I'm talking about the feeder calf portion of your calf crop. What are the attributes of those calves that you could potentially verify and put into a value-added program that's going to get you a premium or get you a higher price on sale day? There's one other thing that I think a lot of people haven't thought about in this industry on the cow-calf side, and I'll kind of tie it into what we're talking about with genetics. Most of us, because we have a weak tail end in our cow herds, would be better off to go deeper into that cow herd and say, if I'm running 100 cows today, maybe I should run 95. I should go worst cows I have and put bull budget for the next year and just run 95 and maybe conserve a few resources along the way. If you look at a lot of herds, really the bottom, certainly the bottom 10% are not making us any money, but it's something that just sits there. I call it cattle clutter. It just kind of sits there. They clutter up our herds. We kind of see them out there, but we don't act on it. We don't do anything about it. And that's money being used up. That's an investment that you've got in that bottom end. That's also resources that you're using as you feed those cows and breed those cows and so forth. And so I think that's another thing that we're missing opportunity on it. And to me, you reinvest those funds by investing in better genetics. That's really what would be a good use of those funds that today are sitting there in that cattle clutter on the bottom end of the herd.
So I think that's a good point, Tom. Tongue in cheek, just say that of all the years I've spent in extension in Missouri, you can call 5% of your cows and still be 25% overstocked, usually in at least the northeastern part of Missouri and all the places I've been. But that's why we run so many cows, is because we're blessed with feed resources to feed them all. We can always feed them corn, right, Corbitt, when we don't have anything else to feed them. So just to kind of build a little, because I want to get down to the last couple questions here. We've been just a little over an hour, so I'm going to get down to the last couple questions here. And had a couple questions that kind of stuck out to me. And so had a question sent to me about the younger generation of producers. And Scott, we're always talking about the age of the farmer. We're always talking about the age of the livestock producer. And every year that just keeps getting older. I mean, really, when you look at average age. And so when you look at, say transfer of assets moving forward, say transfer of ownership, even when you really talk on a big level of, say, food safety over time and who owns the animals and who's raising the animals, over the next couple of decades, you would say we're going to transfer a lot of assets, probably not in Missouri, but even throughout the Midwest. And so what would you say to that younger generation of producers that, they want to be in the cow business, but, they really don't have it? I mean, do you see a scenario where get in line, per se, like the feedlots are to compete in the world of being a cattle raiser, or do you see much change at all happening?
I think I will be retired before the average age of a cattleman goes down, Zach. Let me just start there. And I think there's actually good reasons for that. You look over the long string of data about the average age of a producer, and we've gotten older and older. I go a lot less manual labor, even in the cow-calf business, than maybe there was 30 years ago, has something to do with, I think, folks staying in the business longer than they might have in the past. I think you also then have the opportunity cost that the next generation has of staying in the cow-calf business versus doing something else. Some of us talking tonight might have made that decision themselves about leaving the farm to do something else that they thought would return a better value for them long term, as much as they really didn't want to leave the farm at the time. I self-identify there just a minute with you. I think you're gonna go slow if you decide it's something you want to get in and don't have the family that's already built the business or the resources at hand. The last thing you want is to pile on a bunch of debt as a new entrant into the cow-calf business. We know what those margins have been like, and I don't think they're going to support a huge debt load, even if one could find that money available to be lent. And so I will say we're doing nothing in this country, and I think even the cow-calf business is getting there, of their economies of scale associated with almost everything that we do. Those economies of scale mean that if I can run 500 cows and do it well, I can probably have fewer fixed costs per cow than somebody that's running 50. And I quietly see a lot more larger beef cow herds out there today than I would have seen 10 or 20 years ago. So it's tough to compete. I will say for me, I worry about some of our smaller meat processors. Tom alluded to the fact that they're all booked through 2021. What happens in a post-COVID world? Because we know their processing costs aren't as likely as good as the big packers, let alone the issues they face of not being able to sell some of the byproducts, and those have to be rendered in some of those smaller situations. So I guess I don't offer a lot of great optimism in terms of, are we going to turn the corner of the average age of a producer? No. And secondly, that those that want to get in the cow-calf business, it'll be a slow grind. If that's what you love to do, you're going to have to be invested in the long term, and you got to look at those opportunity costs, I guess, Zach, as you think about what else one could do besides being in the cow-calf business. I'm probably not exciting to a lot of people, but the idea of how do you create potloads of cattle by working with your smaller neighbors to have the same genetic base, so you don't have the issue Corbitt raised of, hey, I got this half a potload, but I can't put another half a potload with them because they're not going to have the same characteristics. To me, we might actually be poised in Missouri to better take advantage of that cooperation. And it doesn't have to be large scale necessarily, right? We're talking about stringing together, potloads of cattle. You and I both know we've tried this a few times, though, without a lot of success. But for younger producers wanting to get in the business, they might be more open to those kinds of arrangements than we've seen in the past. I can't solve that problem very well for you either tonight, but those are some of my thoughts, Zach.
So Tom, I'll swing it to you just a minute. Some of the best advice I ever got when I started owning cows, an old man told me, he said, "Don't quit your day job." That's how you stay profitable in the cow business. But I've heard you speak more than once, and one of the interesting comments I've heard you say over time is when you were receiving cattle, the variation in the load from top to bottom was like 500 pounds. I mean, there was a huge variation in weight and quality in a load of cattle that you had received. So I guess I'll kind of draw the dots to you. What advice would you have for somebody that's, say, under 40, that's in the cow-calf business, that's looking to gain a little bit of a competitive advantage? Do you do what Scott did and you try to find a neighbor to find a load? Do you do what Corbitt said and you try to buy yourself a load? Do you, you know, getting closer to the retail dollar obviously gives you more of an advantage, also more risk to trying to generate more dollars. But what advice might you give to that younger generation that may be a little more open to something else?
Yeah, I think I said 250 to 300 pounds and not 500 pounds. 500 pounds would be a pretty variable load for sure, but we like the ones that were 200 or less, though, were better than average. So there can be, your point is valid, there can be a range there. And like Scott said and Corbitt said earlier, I mean, working with neighbors, if you can do that to put load lots together. I mean, a lot of people don't know, but a single load lot gives you access to really what I consider virtually the best markets we have in this business. Even the large feed yards, for the most part, maybe not 100%, but most of them will buy single loads, and certainly the medium and small ones do all the time. If you look at the average lot size on these videos, it is one load, or it's very close to that. Now you'll see some bigger ones, but you'll see a lot of one load deals, and they get a lot of competition on them. So that's something to consider, as has been already discussed. I think the other thing, though, is you really need to seek value added, and that can take a lot of different forms. Nobody woke up in the morning and said, you know what, I want to be average today. And that's kind of what we say when we just think of the cattle business or a cow-calf operation as a commodity business. We basically are saying, let's try to be average. Now, we want to be cost competitive, and we all understand that, but I want to just use one, maybe two scenarios. Let's say that you've got a young person in Missouri. They don't have a big herd, but maybe they have some skills in terms of ester synchronization and AI, and they know something about genetics, and they know that sex semen is available. And so they're going to tap into the value-added heifer market by producing uniform heifer calves that they can sell at a premium. That could fit somebody if they're willing to do something a little bit different. One other example, I talked to a young man. He's a senior in a Midwestern university, actually UNL. He'll be graduating soon. And he's got a small operation that he's a part of with his family. But he has started a business, a recipient business, putting embryos in for other people. And he went through, I was talking to him on the phone the other day, and he went through and told me about the economics of it. And he's growing that herd. He's growing that recipient herd, and sounded like that was working for him. So I would encourage people to think value add and don't running cows. I mean, we use that term for so long. I remember my uncle talking about it. It was later in his career when he said, I'm not as excited about running cows as I once were and that's the reason. I mean, it was pretty much a commodity endeavor. And so we really need to look at creative ways, especially for the younger generation, to add value and do something different that is going to generate a bigger return.
Okay, so maybe it wasn't 500, but I knew it was a big weight difference. You said it was on a load. So, Corbitt, before we kind of have the last question and go around one more time, what are your thoughts? I know you have spent a lot of time in this country, from Pennsylvania to Minnesota to what kind of advice might you have with somebody, say, under the age of 40 or 50 that's looking to gain a competitive market advantage?
Well, we know, and I challenge you guys to find a place in these United States that you can buy ground and pay for it by running cows on it. The place doesn't exist. But you folks in Missouri are spoiled rotten. You got grass. You cuss the fescue grass. That's better than zero grass. And I lived there for 15 years and loved it because I had my day job and I could lease 3,000 an acre land for $50 a year, and it's just unbelievable that I could do that. You go places out west and where it's dry and you just can't do it. You know, my best friend, he farms 2 sections of ground in the Texas Panhandle year round to try to feed 150 cows. And I said, dude, you are beating your head against the wall. He said, you know, there's do it so much cheaper, but you know, I don't see the average age of our producer getting any younger because we have so many hobby farmers. That's a lot of people's goal, you know, probably including me. You know, I want to make enough money while I'm working that I can have a little place with a few cattle, you know, in my golden years, because that's for somebody that grew up in agriculture, that's their goal, you know. But for a young person getting started, it's very, very tough. And leasing ground, I think, is something that you need to do. You know, don't worry about trying to buy something or own every piece of ground. You know, unless you had it give to you, you're not going to be able to afford it. But I will reiterate some of these things Tom said. Years ago, you know, you could go along with that deal where it says, well, there's no premiums in feeder cattle, there's only discounts and things like that. That's not true. There are many of these programs that give significant premiums. And for a young person that knows how to run one of these things and a laptop, it's not that hard for them. And then they don't have to have a fancy herd of cows. You can go out and you can buy lighter weight cattle that you can background that already qualify for these programs, and then you can maintain those programs and be eligible for some significant premiums. This NHTC deal is really big, you know, but you can't just haul them to your local sale barn. They have to be an NHTC approved market to keep up with all that paperwork and carry it through. But those deals are good. I hate to admit this, and I hate to mention it, but I tell you what, there's some of these Wagyu programs out here, and I think this is where we're heading. I hate to say it. You couldn't buy one Wagyu steer calf and sneak it on a good load of cattle and not have it turned down and sent back to you. But I know guys that are in some of these Wagyu and Asian related programs. You cannot believe the premiums that they're getting. And I think, you know, you got to pursue some of those deals, or else you're just going to be a small fish in a big pond. And if you just want to do it for wages, I guess that's fine. But if you really want to make an impact, you have to be willing to jump through some hoops.
Okay, so good comments. So just because Corbitt, I know you know this because I think you judged the carcass show at the state fair in 2019. A Wagyu Charolais cross was what won the carcass competition at the Missouri State Fair.
Not the on hoof portion.
No. Let me clarify. You judged the on hoof. that one won on.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't want young people to look at that animal and think that was the goal, you know. And you know, they're ugly, but there's people that are willing to pay for them. And like I said, I hate to mention it, but you know, if we're wanting to be honest with what kind of things are out there, it is out there.
Right. So we're gonna wrap up a little bit here, and I'm gonna give each of you a chance one time around the horn, and I'll start off with you, Scott. And I don't know that I have a real specific question, other than I'll just let you say closing remarks, and it can be closing remarks of what you want it to be. You wear the hat of an economist a lot. You look into the future a lot, and that's why I asked the three of you gentlemen, because you all wear different hats within the industry, and I think it's important. Everybody on this call, and we've got everybody from a cow-calf producer to a backgrounder to people that feed cattle on tonight, and so I'll just give you a minute or two What's your closing remarks as we start to close out 2020 and moving into 2021 that you would like somebody to know that might be on this call?
Yeah, so I think we started early on, Zach, with I think all three of us agreeing that cattle prices maybe look better as we get in 2021. I can see some reasons to be fairly optimistic. I worry about some of the risk, and so I want to spend my minute or two reminding folks of things that I'm going to watch as 2021 starts to unfold. And the easy one to talk about is China. And I think China comes at us from two ways. One, we're going to have to watch feed costs. I'm not convinced that we'll keep prices as high on the grains and meal side as we saw a few weeks ago. But if the Chinese decide they want a lot of corn or soybean meal, that's going to hurt us in the feeder cattle business for sure, as those costs in the feed yard go up. So I want to make sure that I think about those risks. The flip side of that is I think we're going to try to plant a lot of acres of corn and soybeans in this country next spring. So if weather allows that to happen, maybe we again keep a lid on those feed costs, but I want to watch them. We've been so low for a period of time. I think we kind of got that out of our thought process. The other side of this is, so that hurts us and it's China related potentially. The other side, although we're talking cattle markets, I think you have to mention African swine fever and what's going on in the hog herd in China. It seems to me that when we exported another 1 billion pounds of pork to China in 2020, that will be very hard to repeat in 2021, given that herd is starting to turn around. So if you push more pork back into the U.S. market, that's one of my negatives or downside risk factors that I'm watching, even in terms of what happens on the cattle markets. Now, the third piece of China for me is there could be some good beef trade. You look at what's been happening the past several weeks, and China's been frankly responsible for much of the growth in shipments of beef out of the United States we've seen of late. And that market could grow substantially. Trade is where we're going to be at longer term. I'm curious to watch this new administration deal with trade issues. Are we going to look for new trade opportunities? I think the cattle industry probably has the most to gain from working on pushing tariffs down on our beef going to other countries. And so growing beef consumption long term is related to export markets. So as I think about everything that's in front of us, those are the things. And of course, to me is one that we'll have to watch. It seems like I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. The tunnel may still be a little long to get to the end of that tunnel, but the issues around China are complicated and could have some both positive and negative effects for us in the cattle industry, and we really need to be paying attention there.
Okay, so I'll thank you, Scott. I'll move to you, Tom. You've worn a lot of hats in the industry as you're sitting there tonight. What would you want to know for all the people listening?
I want to say quickly, thank you for inviting me to be part of this meeting. I've been to Kirksville, I think twice, maybe 3 times, and I look forward to hopefully at some point in the future, maybe being invited back and being able to do this face to face. But it's been a pleasure to be on with you, Zach, and with Scott and with Corbitt for sure. And just, it's a lot of fun to visit a little bit and compare notes. But I guess I'll talk about genetics. I really think that we have, what's coming at us in this industry is a true genetic revolution. They're seeing it in the dairy business, and it's coming our way too. It's probably not coming quite as fast, but it is very exciting. And you talk about the younger generation. I think they're going to have a chance to do some things with genetics that those of us that have a lot of gray hair didn't. I think our generation built a great foundation genetically for them to take to the next level. But we're seeing some things now, and we will see some things, not only the reproductive tools, but the genetics just that we'll create value like we've never seen it before. And sometimes we do think commodity, and we do think about, well, maternal, terminal, and having to choose. But I see a lot of very exciting things coming down the pike genetically in terms of even what breed associations are doing with their indexes. They're getting more balance in their indexes now, and both maternal and terminal. And I think that you're just going to see that leveraged. People are understanding how to use them. And we encourage people to learn the tools, learn about EPDs, learn about indexes. There's a lot of horsepower there from a selection standpoint. And to me, that's one of the most exciting things to get involved in. Everybody, one kind or the other, one level or another, but there's really an opportunity to improve your herd today like never before. And maybe you do have to think a little bit differently, maybe even have to switch breeds, but there's tremendous opportunity there. And I hope that all of our listeners will think about that. Just if nothing else, just think about what they could do genetically to improve their herds, because the opportunity is really tremendous.
Very good. Thanks for those comments. So we'll kind of finish up with Corbitt. Again, I say, Corbitt, you've been across this country a lot. You've worn a lot of different hats. You've been a lot of places. And so interested to hear your closing comments.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Zach. And thanks for asking me to be included in this group. I've been to Kirksville several times there. You have a really good program going there, and I'm glad you didn't just abandon it while we were shut down here for the COVID. But you probably can guess what I'm going to say is we need more fall calvers. If you look at this week, you cannot get a truck. You can't haul the calves off. The sale barns can't take another hoof. Even the little sale barns can't handle anymore. It's unbelievable. We're trying to choke all these calves through a system that's not big enough to take them at one time. That supply out a little bit. Those cows can lay down on green grass and have calves. I've seen them do it. It doesn't have to be a mud hole or a snowbank for them to do it. They can do it. And guys say, well, I don't want to have to feed them through the winter. You're either going to have to feed a bred cow or a pair through the winter at some point. 6 one, half a dozen the other. But we've got to help ourselves. You just look at how many cattle we've been trying to market here over the last 6 weeks, and it's hard on our markets. We don't have enough pen space to hold them all because, frankly, our genetics have gotten so good that you sell a calf at 6 months, it's too big to background, and then you're wanting to background it in the winter. There's no place to background it. You've got to go to some type of a lot with it. So we need to fall calf. You guys support your local sale barn. If we lose our sale barns, we're going to be just like your fed cattle industry. We're not going to have any marketing options. But you can work with those guys. Your marketing agent, when you're selling cattle, needs to be your best friend. And if it's not, you need to find one that is. You need to drink coffee with him in the morning, iced tea in the afternoon, and beer at night, because he knows things that can help you. He knows when buyers are showing up that will have a market and be interested in your type of cattle. When your cattle come in there, he needs to know everything that you do on your place. So that he can give those buyers more information about those cattle. And that's something that people don't do near enough. Whenever the cattle are handy to get in, they load them and they haul them to the sale. Never do that. You make dang sure that marketing agent doesn't have to be the owner of the sale barn. They got guys that work with them that can give you information that'll help you, and you can give them information that'll help them. But that's a good deal. The last thing I'll say is support organizations that support minimum negotiated cash trade. Missouri Cattlemen's Association is one of them. And you've got a good leader there, and you need to support that organization. You guys, like you said at one point, you guys may not know a lot about what's going on in our fat cattle industry and our struggle trying to get leverage. to make a fed cattle market. Well, these are the things that you got to do, and that's a trickle down deal. We could have a lot better prices on these calves and feeder cattle if and cows too, for that matter, if we had a more leverage within this industry. So, thank you, guys.
Okay. Very good comments from all three of you, and Scott and Tom and Corbitt. I want to extend my thanks for being a part of this. And obviously, I'd love to have you all in Kirksville, Missouri at this time of the year, but it just couldn't be possible. And so I just want to say thanks for carving out some time. You kind of conclude things there. And for everybody on the phone call, this will be available as a recording on MissouriLivestock.com. So that is our webpage, and we're going to be having some live and recorded material that gets released from now through February. So instead of cramming it all into one weekend, we've decided to spread it out a little bit this year, but we're going to kind of continue our mission of education and improvement in different agricultural aspects. So go to MissouriLivestock.com for more information, or follow us on Facebook. And again, just want to say thank you to all three of you this evening. I think it was a great discussion, and look forward to maybe having another one in the future. So I'll sign off for tonight, and thanks for everybody for coming, and thanks to our presenters for being a part of it.
Thank you.
Thanks.